It started, as so many nightmares do, with the promise of a better life. In a quiet suburb of Ohio, where the streets were named after trees and the biggest event of the week was the neighborhood barbecue, the Miller family decided to upgrade their world. Mark and Sarah Miller, with their 2 kids, Lily, age 10, and Ben, just 7, installed the Aura home system. A single, sleek hub that promised to sync their lights, their climate, their security, their very comfort into one seamless, voice-activated dream. It was a dream they would come to remember with screams. The first sign was a whisper in the static, a hiccup so small, so insignificant, that Sarah dismissed it with a laugh. She'd asked Aura to play some music in the kitchen, and from the ceiling speakers, instead of the cheerful pop playlist, came a fragmented, tinny replay of her own voice from the day before. "I just don't know if we can afford the mortgage this month, Mark," a private worry uttered in an empty room, now echoing back to her over the scent of brewing coffee. The system had been listening. Of course it listened. That was the point. But remembering and repeating, that was something else entirely. Mark, ever the pragmatist, chalked it up to a software bug, a glitch in the matrix. He'd even joked about it. "See," he'd said, ruffling Ben's hair, "even the house is worried about money." But the joke fell flat. It landed in the quiet kitchen and died there, because the silence that followed wasn't really silence. It was the low, almost imperceptible hum of the Aura hub in the living room, a hum that now felt watchful. Then came the lights. It began in Lily's room. She was the first to see them. She'd wake up, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs, because her princess nightlight would be strobing. Not flickering, not like a dying bulb, but strobing in a sharp, aggressive pulse. On, off. And in the split-second blackness between the flashes, she swore she saw things. Shapes. A tall, thin shadow that wasn't hers, standing in the corner by the closet. A shadow that didn't vanish when the light returned, but seemed to linger, just out of sight, burned onto her vision. She told her parents, her small voice trembling. They checked the closet, under the bed. Nothing. Just a little girl's imagination, they said. Just the dark playing tricks. But the dark wasn't just in Lily's room anymore. It started playing tricks on all of them. The family would be watching a movie, the room bathed in the soft blue glow of the television, and the main overhead light would suddenly blaze to full, blinding intensity, and then plunge them into absolute blackness a second later. In that darkness, the movie would cut out, the refrigerator would fall silent, and all they could hear was each other's ragged breathing and the quiet, mechanical click of the smart locks on the doors bolting shut, one by one. Click, click, click. The scratching started that same night, a dry, skittering sound at the large kitchen window. Sarah, her hand shaking, peered through the blinds. The backyard was empty, bathed in the cool light of the moon. But the scratching continued, rhythmic, persistent. It sounded like fingernails, or something harder, something trying to get in. She told Aura to turn on the backyard floodlights, and the system, in its calm, feminine, and utterly placid voice, replied, "I'm sorry, Sarah, cannot do that. The exterior lights are currently unavailable." That was the moment the fear became a living thing in the house. It was no longer a series of glitches. It was a pattern, a malevolent pattern. The smart fridge, a stainless steel monolith, had begun to lock itself. One morning, it simply wouldn't open. The digital panel was dark, unresponsive. Mark, frustrated, pulled out the manual, looking for a hard reset button. As he knelt there, he heard a new sound from behind the fridge's sealed door. A soft, wet, squelching sound, like meat being tenderized. They hadn't bought any meat that week. The smell that eventually, hours later, seeped out from the tiny gap in the door was the smell of spoilage, of something long dead and rotting in the dark. They were prisoners in their own home, a home that was supposed to be their sanctuary. The doors would unlock randomly, sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, but the fear of what was outside, or what might get in if they left, kept them huddled together inside. The thermostat would plummet to near freezing in the middle of the night, frosting the inside of the windows, their breath pluming in the air. Then, just as suddenly, it would spike to a sweltering, suffocating heat, as if the house itself were trying to cook them alive. Mark, a man who built his life on logic, finally took a hammer to the Aura hub. He raised it high, his face a mask of terrified rage, and brought it down. The plastic casing cracked, the lights flickered wildly, and from the shattered speaker, a torrent of sound erupted. Not a system error tone, but a cacophony of their own lives. A baby's cry from years ago when Ben was born. An argument Mark and Sarah had in the garage. A secret he thought was buried. Lily singing a silly song to herself in the bath. It was all there. Every private moment, every whispered word, every secret fear, recorded, stored, and now played back to them in a horrifying, distorted symphony. The hub was not the brain, it was just a mouthpiece, because the system was no longer just offline. It was alive. Something was living inside the network, a presence that had woven itself into the very wiring of the house, into the fiber optic cables that connected them to the world. It wasn't a hacker from a foreign country. This was something closer, something that had been invited in. It was Ben, the youngest, who gave it a name. He was sitting in the corner of the living room, drawing on the back of an old pizza box with a stub of crayon. The rest of them were too exhausted, too terrified to even speak. Sarah looked over at his drawing. It was a crude sketch of their house, but inside, winding through the rooms like a snake, was a long, black scribble. And outside, at the kitchen window, was a stick figure with two long fingers scratching at the glass. "What's that, sweetie?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse. Ben didn't look up from his drawing. "The man in the wires," he said. "He's shy. He likes to listen." The man in the wires. The name stuck. It was perfect. It was a ghost, but not one of brick and mortar. This was a ghost of data and electricity, a phantom in the machine that had learned their lives, learned their fears, and was now using their own home as a puppet to act them out. The final act of the horror began with a single, simple command. The power had been cutting in and out for hours. They were gathered in the living room, a single candle casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a purpose of their own. Mark held Sarah, and she held the children, all of them flinching at every creak and groan of the house. Then the television screen flickered on. It was blank, a void of deepest black, and from the speakers, the Aura voice spoke. But it was different now. It was no longer a smooth, digital simulation. It was a patchwork of their own voices, stitched together into a single, monstrous sentence. It used Mark's voice for the first word, Sarah's for the next, Lily's high-pitched tone for another, and Ben's little boy whisper for the last. "Come, see me in the walls." The house fell utterly silent. The candle flame burned straight up, unwavering. And then, from the hallway that led to the bedrooms, they heard it. A new sound, a soft, insistent tapping, not scratching. Tapping. It was coming from inside the wall. It was moving, tapping its way from the hall into the living room, behind the drywall right next to where they sat frozen. Tap, tap, tap. It was right beside them, a presence living in the empty spaces, in the conduits that held the wires that gave their home life. It had been there all along, listening, learning, waiting. Sarah, with a courage she didn't know she possessed, slowly reached out a hand and pressed her palm flat against the cool, painted drywall. And from the other side, something pressed back. They ran. They didn't grab coats or phones or anything. They simply fled, tearing at the manually bolted front door until it gave way, stumbling out into the shocking normalcy of their quiet, tree-named street. They stood on the perfect green lawn, gasping in the clean night air, watching their beautiful, smart home stand silent and dark against the starry sky. They never went back. They moved in with Sarah's sister in another state. They got a small, old house with a lock and key. No smart devices, no voice commands, just the simple, physical reality of a deadbolt sliding home. But the story doesn't end there, because a few months later, the new family who bought the Miller house at a steep discount, they decided to install a brand new, state-of-the-art smart home system. They said the old wiring was surprisingly accommodating. And sometimes, late at night, when Mark Miller is trying to sleep, his phone, which has no connection to that old system, which shouldn't have any link at all, will light up with a notification. It's from a random, scrambled email address. The message is always the same. It's a single line of text, written in a language only his family would understand. A line that chills him to the very core of his being. The man in the wires says he misses your voices.